What's up, Mandate family? I've got a fantastic episode here today. I'm joined by my guest, Ed Frauenheim, who's the co author of the book Reinventing Masculinity, which I highly recommend. Today, we're going to be talking about masculinity at work and how we've all learned what it means to be a guy and we've learned what it means to be this strong male leader. But things are really changing. So, we've got some really helpful tips for you about how to embrace more skills, some soft skills, vulnerability, connection, empathy, compassion in the workplace, and some great examples about how when you do this, it really will transform you as a leader and your career trajectory and what you can achieve out in the world. Enjoy this episode.
Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Mandate. I'll be your host, Adam Hoffman, here today. I am very grateful and excited that you are able to join us. If you're watching live on this Friday morning, here in Austin, Texas, it is frigid but sunny, so we will take it. Today I've got a really amazing guest. Ed and I had a chance to connect about a month ago, thanks to a mutual friend of ours. But we are here today to talk about masculinity in the workplace and really the difference between this constrained form of masculinity that we've all been living for so long and this new and beautifully defined definition of liberating masculinity that Ed and his co-author have come up with. So today I'm joined by Ed Frauenheim, who is the co-author of Reinventing Masculinity, with another amazing Ed that hopefully we'll have on the show at some point in time. And it is called Reinventing Masculinity, the Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection. Ed has been a journalist, a speaker and consultant, and he studied the workplace, technology, and culture matters for more than 25 years. So thanks for hanging out with me this morning, Ed.
Thanks, Adam. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
How are you?
I am good. I, like most of the country or the world, it's been a kind of a topsy-turvy couple days, but I'm seeing silver linings in our national government and in society, and excited about a new start to the year. We've been talking about, I've got a new chapter in my work life where I've left the company that I was at for 7 years. Great place to work, which is a great place. So I'm excited about new year, new you in a lot of different ways. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think congratulations on this next step of the journey. I feel like when we've talked, you did so much great work at a great place to work. Whichever time I get to say that, you couldn't have picked a better name for an organization. And I hadn't fully realized just how much, I had looked at the research and the studies and all the data that you guys had created as part of that organization. It's been really instrumental to the way that I think about organizations. And a lot of times when I've looked at places to go and work, I think many of us have probably seen a lot of the information and research that you guys have done.
Well, I'm glad that it's been helpful. I agree. There's been really good content and research that's come out of there and really made the connection between a high trust, inclusive workplace and great results, and how important that is for people to thrive and really bring out, be their best selves at work and then in society as well. So we talk about great places to work being better for people, better for business, and better for the world. And I know that is going to continue, of course, without me, but I'm excited to kind of, push forward in some new directions as well.
Cool. Well, hopefully we'll get to a couple of those new directions as we journey today through our conversation. But let's jump in. Before we get to work, I'd love to hear, what has your journey been like with masculinity?
It's been an interesting one, I would say. Not always an easy one. I think about that kind of critical period for a lot of men and boys around your 12, 13, 14, coming into adolescence and early manhood. And that was a time where I started, I think, being aware of these rules and expectations to be a strong man, to be a winner, to be kind of stoic. And those didn't work out didn't fit so well for me. I tended to be, I was skinny, wasn't that super strong guy. I froze up in some key moments in sports, even though I played a lot of sports. Like didn't have that kind of winner feel. And I'm a sensitive guy. I was a sensitive guy then, still am. And that sort of ran counter to how you're supposed to show up. And then if we move to the chapter of being, an adult in the workplace, some similar stuff was challenging around those traditional expectations. You're supposed to rise to the top of the corporate heap, and I've had this strange journey where I feel like I'm proud of what I've accomplished in my work life, but I haven't risen to the top echelons of the hierarchies. In particular, I've managed one person for one day. I may have the smallest management career in the history of the world, maybe. So that has been something that at times has plagued me. And so it's taken me a while to realize those expectations of how we can show up as a man really didn't serve me. And I think I'm trying to, in this work with this book, kind of turn my own lemons into lemonade. To see that, actually there's a deeper sense of satisfaction that comes from not being about self aggrandizement and achievement alone, but actually service and purpose. And that actually emotions are valuable, and it's actually not so great to always be competing and to collaborate, not worry about winning. So my own journey is reflected in this work, and appreciate you asking about it. I'm hoping that help other guys that may have had some struggles along those that I've had.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the impetus for this show in the first place, and it's been interesting because I've heard similar stories from the full spectrum, if you will, of masculinity, from what externally might look like very, I don't even like to use these terms, to be totally honest, but just to paint the picture of, somebody who might be, the skinny guy and more sensitive and more feminine on one end of the spectrum, over to the other, like hyper masculine, super muscular, like tough, comes off as aggressive, and everybody in between. There's this feeling of like, it still doesn't feel right. There's something else out there, no matter where you're at, and that's one of the reasons why I was when I read the term for the first time, constrained masculinity. I was like, yeah, that's what it feels like. And I've heard people talk about, oh, masculinity puts us in this box, and we don't realize that we're in the box, but we're always trying to get out of it because there's this whole other world that we either can see and want access to, or we've had access to, but we feel guilt and shame, or in some case punishment from it. So like, how did you get to these two definitions?
Well, first of all, thanks for exposing those challenges for guys and how limited what we use a term very similar to what you said, confined masculinity, how that is, it kind of prevents men from living a full human life, really. And the way we got to that term is, I owe a lot to my co-author, Ed Adams, for looking into the psychology work of a Japanese psychologist named Morita. And he had a notion of a confined self and an extended self. And the confined self tended to be a pretty unhealthy version of the self. It was self-absorbed. It was not in community with others, and there were like a lot of problems that came out of that. And we kind of applied that lens to see, this actually helps understand the ways we've been taught to be men, that we have limited roles we're allowed to play and limited ways we're allowed to relate to each other. That's kind of how we can boil it down, that we're supposed to be the protector, the provider, maybe the conqueror, but not necessarily the caregiver, not necessarily the environmental steward or the sensitive lover. And then in the relation piece, we're mostly supposed to fight. We're supposed to be in rivalry and win all the time, as opposed to collaborate. And we're not supposed to be emotionally attuned to other people so much as be reserved and focus on just the rational. So, one last piece of that is that we're actually supposed to be self-made and islands to ourselves. And that actually ignores all the ways and the beauty of community and connection that we know human nature is really made out of that. So that's kind of a somewhat short answer to how we came to that term, confined masculinity.
Yeah, it's really helpful, and all those words I felt you couldn't have picked better words. I apologize for
No
butchering
worries.
that. But with
We
constraint
use
over
that word in term.
confined,
It's a
I've
good.
been reading the book.
It's a good
But
synonym.
yeah, I mean, and maybe it's just my I'm putting my own spin on it because that's what it's felt for me. Is I felt so constrained with this definition of what it is, and it's helped me think about all the parts of my life where I felt not enough, and that's kind of been a theme for me recently. Is less thinking about I need more, but like what is my definition of enough of these things? And certainly the one that I've felt like I have struggled to have enough of in my life is connection. And that's been a piece that has come up with time and time again with the men that I've talked to. And I think humans in general, especially right now. And then the other one is that my expression of compassion is like, that's something that I think is viewed as feminine or weak or things like that. But like, it's just such a core part of who I am and how I am. And I felt like I've never really fully been able to express that. I know those are two big parts that you talk about in the book. So before we get into the workplace, let's talk about the other side. So you've got confined masculinity, which is kind of what we've all been living in today, and liberating masculinity, which is the exciting part that you guys talk about. What is that? What goes into it? Tell us more about it.
Sure. We see liberating masculinity as a way to be a man that really frees you to live a full life. It's allowing you to break out of those confined strictures when it comes to roles, relationships, and really even about the soul and the spirit. So some of the things that are critical there are, as you pointed out, the connection and compassion piece. Now we're saying we're going to be compassionate. We're going to be emotionally intelligent and attuned to our feelings and other people's feelings, and recognize suffering in ourselves and in others. And when we do that, whole new avenues and horizons of lived experience are possible to men that we've been shut off from, and we have shut ourselves off from. And with the connection piece, we're calling on men to say, you know what, let's acknowledge and build on the ties we have to each other as human beings, but also to the planet, to the notion that we are, embodied in bodies and part of an ecosystem and an environment that we too often have kind of decided we're not part of that. We're just going to control it as opposed to operating within it and being interdependent. So we're suggesting we move away from this notion that we are independent, we're fiercely, self-made and self-sufficient, and rather being interdependent and relating to others to really kind of build up on those ties that are fully human, and that again will allow us to have a fuller experience with our friendships, with our relationships, and with our world.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it starts to, when I started reading all the qualities or the traits that are associated with liberating masculinity, I was like, yes, these are the things. These are the things that I've been wanting to do more of. And in particular, for me, it was like reading. I'd had a experience recently where somebody had told me like one of the greatest gifts that I can continue to give is like my love. Like I just have this unending well of love to give to people. And I was like, yes, like this describes it. Like I just want to go around and give everybody hugs, like tell everybody that I love them. And it felt very freeing to kind of read that, two guys kind of got to this place. I was like, yes, this. How do we get more of this into the world? And into the workplace.
That's such a great thing to hear, that you're feeling that kind of freedom, because we've been told, you're not supposed to be lovey, as a guy. That's the feminine, and it's it borders on homosexual. Which we're often, at least I grew up at a time where that was taboo and mocked, homosexuality, and so I think in the last several decades we're realizing that's ridiculous. It's like, why are we judgmental and ruling out this whole sphere of life and the experience of many people that's core to their identity. And I think the liberating masculinity at its best does free men to love, to use your phrase. And so I love that you're seeing that connection there, and hats off to you for loving out loud, Adam.
Well, I'll go a step further. So I've been running an experiment, if you will, with my close guy friends, in if I'm talking to my mom on the phone or my dad or my brother, like we always end saying, I love you, tell my wife that I love her every single day. But like, I also have love for many of my friends. And so I've been experimenting with like when we sign off on conversations, I'll tell them that I love them, just like I was talking to a close family member or my wife about anything. And it's been really fun to see what those reactions have been. And my favorite part, I think, so far is when it almost feels like, and sometimes I can't see their face because it's just on the phone, but it almost feels like they don't even think about it. It just comes out. I'll be like, all right, man, love you, talk to you later. And they'll be like, love you too. And then there's almost like this kind of pause before they hang up, like, oh my God, did I just say that out loud?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to elicit is like, is there any consciousness to, oh yeah, this is a deeper relationship and I'm comfortable saying like, I love you, man.
That's great. And it's happening in the culture. You're part of something bigger, I think, too, Adam. Like you see in the sports world, there's more and more like, let's hug it out, love you, man. Tom Brady, I think, said that to all these people after the Super Bowl win a couple of years ago and from the Patriots. And there's a neat part of an anecdote that we capture in the book where Ed Adams, my co-author's men's support group, basically men mentoring men, got to this point where they started telling each other that they loved each other. And it was a very kind of awkward moment, like you're describing at first, where this one guy had been really supported by these other men who were helping him work through a problem. And he said, like, it's like, and someone else said, you love us? And he's like, yeah, I do. And they're like, love you too, but it was like, there's this barrier to overcome that. Why, this is a time to do it, and I think it just frees us to have that deeper relationship as you put it.
Yeah. Well, let's start switching gears and get into work in particular, because I know that's what we're here to talk about today. And to get us started, you tell a story in the book about Travis, this young, ambitious manager. And the quote that I pulled out, you say, he managed people using a method that roughly fit into his version of masculinity, an autocratic, controlling, callous style. He had this me first perspective, goal fixation, top down model of leadership, and his upward trajectory hit this hard ceiling. And he was really feeling it. He talks about that, sort of in the book. And I saw myself in Travis, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was, early 20s at this startup, get put in charge of managing a bunch of kids just out of college. Like they're not that much younger than me. And that was what I went to, was like, okay, well, I have to show them that like, I'm the boss. I know everything that I'm doing. Just follow my plan because it's the right plan. And you basically shut up, put your head down and get your work done. And if it's not working, it's your fault. It's not mine. And like, it didn't go well. And it resulted in them not liking me. It resulted in me burning myself out. And it was one of the worst and best experiences of my life. Best in that, like, I learned so much from it in hindsight. And it really opened me up to see what I didn't want to be as a leader. So, let's talk about kind of Travis and why do we start there as men?
Because that's how we're taught to show up. Your experience, what you chose is just makes so much sense, Adam, and it did for Travis too. Like that's the model of our dads, of the leaders we saw out there, like the decisive, firm, iron-fisted man, who's going to be the conqueror of teams and the boss who's going to give directions. And we just now know that that's not working in the work world that's emerging, that autocratic, barking boss, like I think you said, callous. We use the word callous, and you're saying I'm just going to make them do it without much regard for their feelings or what they're experiencing. That's just increasingly ineffective.
Yeah, and I mean, what I felt in those moments was it didn't feel true for me, but it felt like it was the right thing to do in that moment. It was like, well, this doesn't feel right, but this is what it's I think I'm supposed to do it this way. But then I would go home, and this was a big piece that ultimately led to this period of my life where I dealt with depression and anxiety, was this internal conflict and tension that I had, because I'd act that way and then I'd be like, no, I don't, that's not what I want, but I feel like I have to. And yeah, that was it was challenging. So it was kind of fun, but also a little bit painful to see myself in Travis and be like, oh yeah, wow. I bet there's a lot of other guys that go through this too.
Yeah, and Travis had that same kind of nagging problem with it. Like he wanted to be supportive for his team, but his model of leadership was what exactly you described too. Like I'm going to ride them, and actually micromanage them in his case. Like, let me see what you're doing, and I'm going to be the one who says how it's done, not just where we're going. And I think one of the things I've seen with my co-author Ed's men's group and other folks is that it's men who follow those rules are ultimately pretty dissatisfied by the time they're in their 50s and 60s. That it's like, what does this all meant? Like, I haven't been a full my best self, or I have been like a robot in some ways, or kind of a military general, but where's the love, and within my for my people that I've worked with, or even maybe my family and others that I've kind of disregarded because I spent so much time just on this work identity or work persona, this mask that we'd put on.
Yes, for sure. How do we short circuit that? How do we make it so that people don't have to wait to their 50s and 60s? Men don't have to wait that long to wake up to it.
Well, we think that one path is this 5 C's model that we talk about in our book, and we've mentioned 2 of them so far. The curiosity. Well, we've mentioned compassion and connection, but we start off with curiosity, courage, compassion, connection, and commitment. And these are practices that are, on the one hand, they're age old, and yet they also need an upgrade, or we kind of offer some new definitions for how men can see them in the current moment in the 21st century. But if people follow those in the work world and beyond, you can make progress. And we've seen it. Ed Adams, as folks have seen it. I've seen examples in the business world where men who are showing up in these ways are increasingly successful. So we talk about the liberating power. It's not just that you're feeling free. You've got more power in the world. Even in traditional worlds, like you're able to advance in organizations or accomplish great goals because you're working with people that are drawn to you and that are effective on teams. It's all good when you start practicing these things.
Yeah, no, I love that. One thing that you write in the book is soft skills are success skills. And it's been a topic that I've been having more and more lately is how do we start teaching people these soft skills, or even at the beginning, just identifying that they have them inside of them. And we just need to start flexing those muscles a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a great point. One simple way that we can start practicing and developing those soft skills is doing check-ins. In the business context, in meetings, asking people, "How are you doing?" And not just it being a superficial question, but maybe asking a probing question, or really offering, if you're the leader of that team, offering a bit more vulnerability than maybe you did in the past. So it's not just I'm fine. It's like, actually, I'm pretty torn up about the way the political chaos of the last couple of days, say, or my brother-in-law is sick with a stroke, and I'm worried for him. And so this part it's weighing on my mind and my heart today. These are the things that we know. I imagine you've been seeing this too. Is like, this is what builds psychological safety in teams. And we now know from the research of like Amy Edmondson of Harvard, from Google's research, that's the most important thing for team success. It's not how smart the people are on the team, what their IQs are. It's not what degrees they have. It's whether they can feel safe to bring their whole selves to the team, not be mocked, and have a sense of, I can actually share who I am and be fully myself on this team.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Is we've gone through, I don't know, most of history is what it feels like, at least, what I've looked at it, is people talk about work-life balance as if you go to work for this period of time. And then like there's a different self that's outside of work. There's like a work self. And then, so we keep trying to find this like work-life balance, assuming that we're this way at work and then we're a different way at home. But what I'm hearing and what I've experienced too is that no, it's all one self. And if you're trying to do this flipping back and forth and being different selves throughout the day, you're just going to end up being exhausted,
Yeah, exhausted and ultimately less effective. Not as satisfied, and ultimately we're seeing like it's it's, some of the work of Brene Brown and others have shown, like, when you're vulnerable, you have more power. You're actually drawing people to you because they're moved. But when you're opening up your defenses, or dropping your defenses, letting people see what you're really experiencing, um, and you can go too far in that direction. You can be a puddle of tears all the time, but we're kind of far away from that extreme at the moment, where we actually need to do more of the, like, yeah, this is how I am right now, and I'm now, I don't know all the answers, as you put it. Like, you were saying you had to know all the answers. When you admit you don't, and invite people to help you, if you're, say, leading a team, that tends to bring out the best in people. We are drawn to help each other, and we're drawn to want to have a say in things. So that's another piece of the puzzle here for why this liberating masculinity is powerful and needed, is that so much of the old masculinity was about dictatorship, essentially, at work. Like, I'm going to tell you what to do, and how you're going to do it, and where we're going to go. You don't have a say. You're a cog in this machine, a foot soldier. That doesn't work in the we talk about the work world getting faster, flatter, and more fairness focused. And if you don't give options for people to have a say, you're going to be too slow. You can't compete. If you're a top-down bureaucratic organization where you're funneling information to the top, they make decisions and then send out the directions. No, you need everybody to be sensing and responding to super fast-moving developments, and that's relates to this idea of a flatter work world and flatter organizations, where you've got ad hoc teams. We know that psychological safety matters to bring out the best in all those teams. Again, people want to have a say in those teams. And finally, this fairness piece. In the wake of Me Too and Black Lives Matter, you've got to be mindful of how other folks have not had a fair shake, really, at work, and the need to kind of be an ally to create more fairness, be compassionate for those folks who have had a harder, road to hoe, and really show up as someone who's seeking to help the success of others, even as you succeed.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any good tips on ways that we can be more aware of the things that we're probably just on autopilot most days at work? Like, how can we raise our self-awareness of not only for ourselves, but our teams and the people around us?
Great. It's a great question. I do think I like what you said about start with ourselves, because I think the first piece is developing a bit more of an emotional intelligence about what we are ourselves experiencing, and some of the ways we get triggered, or we find ourselves going into old habits. And then it can include, especially, like a meditative practice, journaling, or being mindful of what we're experiencing emotionally. We just been told to ignore that as men, and that's not effective anymore. And we need that awareness also then to start being mindful of our privilege and the power we've experienced and enjoyed, or benefited from, just by virtue of being men, often white men, often straight white men, in my case. And then I think there's a lot about listening, asking that question: how are you doing? Tell me about your story. What are your joys, your challenges? And also reading, doing your homework to kind of learn about the experience of others. That's been a big part of this racial reckoning, is reading books like Ibram Kendi's books, reading books like Black Fatigue, understanding and I did that myself. I read part of I began this book called Black Fatigue, about a Black woman who was at Xerox in Rochester, New York, not far from where I grew up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I keep being like shocked by what she experienced. And it's that sense of learning about other people that I think can help us develop that self-awareness that really allows us to show up and build really inclusive workplaces where everybody can thrive.
Yeah, I love that. It reminded me of a couple things. One, I started thinking about one-on-ones that I've had with people, and just in the last couple of weeks, as part of another project, I've been interviewing sales leaders and sales team members, and one-on-ones keep coming up. And so most of the time, people describe their one-on-ones as like, it's a task check-in. What's the status of this deal? What got done here? What's up next? Move on. Every now and again, people will say like, yeah, and then every third one-on-one, or every now and again, like, we'll talk about how I'm really doing and my performance. But I've yet to hear somebody say that they spend time in their one-on-one checking in on how they're doing as just people and humans and employees. And it feels like that alone by itself is creating the space to, whether it's starting the meeting or at some point in time when you ask, how are you? It's like a double, how are you? Right? That the first,
Yes,
how are you
that's
gets them
nice.
to say, oh, I'm pretty good. Things are going good, like you did. And then there's the like, great, how are you really? And it's like, well, my mom just got COVID last week, and I'm really frustrated about what happened at the Capitol yesterday, and I kind of don't know what to do about this other part of my life. It's like, okay, well let's talk about that, because that's probably going to have more of an impact on this to-do list that I can see in whatever tool we're using than anything else.
I think that's so true, Adam. I can speak from experience about the value of those double check-ins, as you put it. They're the genuine check-ins. We just have been doing that at Great Place to Work. I'm saying we, I was we until last month, but over the last year, and a lot of that was led by one of the men we profile in the book, Tony Bond, who's our Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Diversity Officer, where we just made space for people to talk about what they're experiencing and what they're going through. And I think that elevated everybody's sense of community, of mutual purpose, of mutual aid, because there's a wide range of difference. Even though we're all in the pandemic, everybody is experiencing differently, from those who have got young children to work to manage and handle all that stress, to others that are just isolated or living by themselves. Still others, like you mentioned, may have parents with COVID, or some of them people. There was at least one staff member who had COVID and talked about it in very personal, poignant terms. So that did not distract us from the business work we did. Great Place to Work had an amazing year financially, I think, because we were all revved up, thanks partly to this full, emotionally intelligent, emotionally available way of being with each other.
Yeah.
And that's needed. That's why Liberating Masculinity has to be there, because our leaders would not have been able to pull this off or make space for this if they were following those old rules of like, that's emotional, soft stuff, doesn't belong in the workplace. No, they invited it in and they showed it themselves. So
Yeah,
that's vital.
that's really special. And it makes me think back to an organization that I was a part of when things weren't going well. And the the kind of messaging and the leadership team was, we don't have time for feelings. We just need people to, focus on what needs to get done and go and execute. Like feelings, culture, all that stuff. We'll figure that out when things are going well. But otherwise, like, we just don't have time for that. And then you had the staff who was like, can we please talk about this stuff? Because like, we are not okay. And like, yeah, you keep showing us these PowerPoint slides of what we need to go and do, but hey, guess what? They're not happening because, hey, we're not okay. So if you're an employee and maybe you don't have that level of influence inside your organization, but you see the need for this type of liberation to occur, whether it's masculine or not, how can you raise that up and elevate it?
That's a hard thing when you're not in power to do, Adam. And I think, one thing you can do is practice it yourself. You always have, there's like the Viktor Frankl thing. We can bring we choose the attitude we bring to any situation. So you can say, well, I'm going to do my own personal check-ins. I'm going to keep track of my own how okay or not okay I am. And I'm also, and the other thing you can do is look for compatriots in that. Is there one manager are there some colleagues that share your interest in being real, about what's going on? And if you also might want to start looking at LinkedIn and job boards. Like, there are more and more places now that is part of the culture. And you can just go to Great Place to Work's list of certified great workplaces to find that. There's also ratings on Glassdoor that give you a fuzzy truth of what's going on. We don't have to be stuck at crappy workplaces anymore, working for bosses that are stuck in that confined masculinity model of leadership.
Well, what you just said, that is going to be one of the quote cards that we use to promote this episode. So like, you don't have to be stuck in a crappy place to work, everybody. Like, there are better options out there. I think that's great. So the next thing that I'd love to jump into is this concept of the for all leader. Can you tell us what that means and what that entails?
Sure. The for all leader is the leadership pinnacle that we discovered at Great Place to Work. We studied 10,000 managers, 75,000 employees, looking at survey comments that we gather. And we found that the leaders that were the most inclusive, that had more than 90% of their people had a consistently great experience, these were the leaders that were also the most effective. They had the highest markers of productivity, adaptability, and retention on their teams, and they had certain traits that stood out. Among them was a sense of purpose, long-term purpose, and the sort of highest calling of the organization and their teams. They also had a sense of humility. They weren't that sort of know-it-all boss that you described feeling like you had to do when you started off, or Travis kind of had that view too. They also are very focused on building bonds of trust within their teams and then outside of their teams, to help other people thrive, help their people thrive. And so these are basically, it's dovetailing with the research on psychological safety. It's dovetailing with what we say about liberating masculinity. That this is not about being the know-it-all boss, the one that's emotionally unintelligent, unavailable, but rather the boss that's a good listener, that's able to sort of appreciate people of different backgrounds and make them feel a sense of belonging on their teams, to get to that 90+ percentage level of inclusion. And essentially, these are folks that are showing up as a liberating. If they are men, they're showing up with a liberating masculinity, and if they're women, they're also adopting similar behaviors. But this is the liberating masculinity model is something that can be applied to all genders. Just like men can. We actually are saying this is in some ways a marrying of some traditionally masculine qualities and traditional feminine qualities. We just all got to be human now, and those For All leaders showed that really in the research.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading that section, just to see that was there was some data behind it, in terms of it being welcomed, it being successful. And then I think you said something about more and more companies are seeking these vulnerable, empathetic listening skills in leaders. And I'd be curious, what have you heard about how are people filtering for that in the obviously you can't pick that up on a resume unless I put it on my resume, which is an interesting thing to think about. But like
Yeah.
how are people filtering for that when they're hiring for these important leadership roles?
Some of them are putting it on the job description. I just interviewed some folks at a company that talk about humble confidence. I think that's the phrase they use for how they're going to be seeking their people out. And I also think it's about showing it at the leadership level. Like a couple of examples I've seen over the past year where leaders of major companies were super inspiring. And one of them is Tim Ryan, who's the top executive of PwC, the professional services and accounting giant. Tim Ryan is this kind of masculinity as I see it. He's been reflecting on questions of racial equity over the last 5 years or so, since he joined PwC as its top leader, or he elevated to that point, and initiated conversations about race, in which he learned, for example, that his Black employees always made sure they carried their business cards when they were driving, because if they got pulled over as driving while Black, is the phrase, like they could prove that they could afford this car, and other similar stories emerged about, wow, your life is very different from mine, and this is how we need to now take our experiences and really try to create a truly inclusive culture at PwC, acknowledging how different people are experiencing the world. So he also was willing to share on a webinar with us that his family was experiencing mental health challenge. And he's also now taking this question about racial equity to a public policy level. He started an organization several years ago called CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. Now he's got an offshoot where he's sending a number of PwC smart people to work on public policy for racial equity in the United States. So when you think about that's listening, the issue of taking purpose to heart, he wants to build a more trusting society, which requires fairness, and then being vulnerable about saying, mental health, which has been stigmatized, this is touching my family. So I think when people show up that way is in leadership roles, that makes it okay for the entire organization to live that way and operate at all the levels. And that's going to attract people that want to bring their full selves to work.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. As much as I want to not believe that it all starts at the top, some of these things really have to start at the top. And And I've been thinking a lot about how even if you had a whole organization, like all the employees are totally bought into this way of thinking, this way of behaving, and they're doing it, but top level management isn't having it. Like it's there's not that sort of rise up scenario doesn't happen in that case, and we really need more people like him to to your point to show that, to be vulnerable, to show what's possible, to ask those questions, to put that stuff out in the open, to create that psychological safety for others to also step into it.
I agree. And I also will say that there's a new kind of organizational model that's surfacing that I mentioned in the book. It's called a teal organization, and that's really kind of the alternative to that top-down leadership model. And we've all the teal world is basically it's defined by three breakthroughs, you could say. More self-management, so more democratic, distributed leadership, distributed power. Holism, where you can bring your full self to work and you see the organization is connected to the world and the environment, not the sort of walled off, just think about the profits and not worry about anything else. And lastly, it's driven by an evolving sense of purpose, so that it's not only putting purpose above profits, but it's also constantly reflecting on what is it called to do as an organization. So the people are doing that, and the whole organization is attuned to how they need to show up in the world. And those organizations can't really emerge if the top leader isn't willing to share power, really embrace all those ideas. But when you do have a leadership that is doing that, then you have a great sense of partnership throughout the whole organization. And the leaders often, they're not a traditional executive making critical decisions, but rather supporting, being a servant almost to everybody else in the organization. And some of these places like the Buurtzorg home health organization in the Netherlands, the Morningstar tomato processing plant in California. These are examples of teal organizations that are just dramatically productive and effective. So there are alternatives to that top-down model, but even it requires people that are starting them, that are kind of nominal leaders, to embrace that sense of we are going to be more partners than a paternalistic leader and peons below them.
Yeah. Why teal? Why is that the term?
Good question. Teal is, I should have said this before, it's part of a color scheme that maps onto levels of human consciousness. And this can sound a little esoteric, but basically there's some developmental human development thinkers that have come up with a scheme of colors that go from like red to orange to green to teal. And they map onto organizations that say have different levels of awareness and consciousness. So at that orange level is maybe the typical capitalist organization that's driven by achievement and about profits. It doesn't pay that much attention to the impact on the world or to kind of including other voices. The green one it kind of maps onto the diversity and inclusion push these days, where okay, everyone's going to have a say, get included. The teal one is a step higher than that, we'd say, because it actually does distribute power. It's not just having everyone gets to say something, but you're going to be giving power out and letting people with authority, expertise kind of move forward. And it's also, it's got this sense of deep purpose. It's not going to be, let's worry about, getting to certain revenue goals. It's more like we are about achieving something that serves the world.
Yeah.
So that's where the teal stuff comes in.
I promise I did not choose teal because we were talking today. This is just
yeah, you got your dark teal there. I love it.
I know. As soon as you said teal and I read in the book, I was like, oh, well, this will be perfect timing. I don't have to ask Ed what color he wants on in the background. I've already got it on.
Right on. And you notice our book cover has got that color scheme as well. My co-author was willing to let me have that piece, which I think is a good looking color too.
Oh, yeah,
so
I've got it in the mandate colors as well.
Yeah.
So one of the other areas that I wanted to get into was you talk about, or you tell the story in the book about Paul and his calling to be a nurse, and how you hit on the big trend right now, which is job displacement, and how a lot of the new jobs that are replacing factory jobs and their blue collar positions are in helping professions that are historically associated with women. And like we're seeing tremendous amounts of job growth there, but there's this sort of resistance to like, well, that's not for me. And then you've got this great story to go with it about Paul finding out that like thinks that he should go be a nurse. Then he does it and he loves it. And he's living this like more fulfilled life that he's ever had before. Talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I love that story as well, Adam. And to your point, he not only kind of had heard this calling within him to be a caregiver, a nurse, that he eventually found he could pursue. I think it was because of the Men Mentoring Men group that gave him that courage to leave a different line of work. But then he thrived when he was there. He was thinking about new ways to make his emergency room better. And one thing he brought to it was a greater sense of compassion and kindness, because there had been sort of a dark humor within the emergency room setting. He noticed some EMTs that were just sort of callous about gunshots, say, or other kind of mishaps. The injuries they were experiencing and bringing people to the hospital with. And it was a defense mechanism, and Paul kind of called attention to this and said, let's treat people with greater dignity and kindness in this setting, and that elevated the place, and he's found himself rising in the organization, getting greater responsibilities, leadership roles, because I think he's been able to pursue his calling.
I love that. There's something I hadn't really thought about calling until I started working with the coach that I work with right now. And he was kind of like, yeah, this, there's purpose, and that can kind of send you down the wrong path. And, what am I supposed to be when I grow up? But I really, really gravitated towards this idea of like my calling from the standpoint of like, there's some voice somewhere that's saying like, Adam or Ed or Paul, like, you got to come and do this thing. Like, this thing is for you. And then when you get in that zone, you're kind of unstoppable, because it's bringing out all the best parts of you that bring you energy, that don't suck energy from you. At least that's the way that I've kind of thought about
it. I think you named it really well there. And I think that goes back to this idea of how the confined masculinity keeps us from hearing that calling. We think of intuition as like a female intuition, right? We block off this notion that we might be, that our soul may be drawn to something, and that it taps into this notion of spirit, which we also kind of like write off as woo woo, or maybe have a very strict sense of religiosity that is about following the teachings of a particular practice. But more and more, I think that there is an openness and a realization that when we listen to those callings, to our intuition, when we are available to where we're drawn, as you said, Adam, the excitement, the enthusiasm is hard to turn off, and you can get through a lot of challenge when you're really attuned to where your spirit wants to go.
Yeah. No, I love thinking about that alignment, and once again, you have to open up. You've got to kind of take off these constraints to be able to see those possibilities, to hear the voice, whatever you want to make it. Make the analogy to see those opportunities. Have you found anything that works for you to open up to more of those possibilities? And what comes to mind for me is I love singing, right? But I've always been like, if I told my guy friends that I wanted to go take singing lessons, they'd be like, what the hell's the matter with you? Like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
That's one of my goals this year now. It's like, I want to go take singing lessons. And I wouldn't have been open to that before. So what have you found that helps you open up to more of these liberating things?
Great question. Journaling is big for me. I'm like, got my little notebook here that I'm constantly trying to do a reflection a day, if not more than that. I would say that prayer, I have a little ritual with my wife and some friends where every morning we say the serenity prayer and kind of hear what's on each other's hearts. And that goes in. I also attend a Presbyterian church here in San Francisco. I'm one of the rare churched people of San Francisco. And I would say another thing is being in community around it. Like, that prayer porch, we call it a prayer porch. It comes out of a beautiful ritual that my aunt and uncle started when their son died in a tragic accident, and people just started praying on their porch every day in Chicago. And so we've borrowed that tradition. And the notion that your soul will speak more bravely when it's surrounded by loving, caring people is powerful. And Parker Palmer, the author, talks about this. And I have found it to be true as well. So those are some practices, make time to be quiet and listen and reflect, but also find a circle of friends and loved ones that can help you hear your calling.
Wow, that's really powerful. I've got a lot to think about on that one for sure. And there's a really good quote in there that I'm going to make sure to go and write down from it
Oh,
too.
thank you.
Yeah, there is that is another one of those powers of connection that I feel like
Nice.
we can gloss over sometimes. Is that there's the connection is like, hey, we're hanging out, we're connected, cool, that's great. But that next level of connection that helps you hear that calling, that helps you see these possibilities, whatever your sensory input is that you want to go with. Finding that right group, and whether it's men or women or mix, whatever it is for you, young, old. It's about those people that can help you hear and see the goodness and the greatness and the amazing things that are all inside of us.
Totally. And I wonder if I can share one other example to kind of make this clear that it's not going to cost you your career necessarily to kind of explore these things. Can I share one other example?
Yes, please.
And this doesn't exactly follow that community thing we were just talking about, but in a way it does. I was going to share the example of Chuck Robbins, the CEO of Cisco. And when he took over as CEO of Cisco some years ago, the technology giant based in San Jose, California, he soon into his leadership there, he had a dream of visiting a homeless encampment in San Jose, which is in the Silicon Valley area, the Bay Area. And he saw in the dream the face of his pastor and his father. And rather than, just, oh, that was a bad dream. The next day he woke up and said, I need to do something about this. He was actually listening to that intuition, that calling, if you will, and said, he called the mayor of San Jose the next day and said, I want to help. And then he started sharing his desire to help with his organization, with Cisco. Not only did they devote tens of millions of dollars to programs and facilities to help with homelessness, but he kind of inspired a company-wide elevation of philanthropy. And then also dovetailed with higher business performance, because everyone's now prouder to be at Cisco, to be part of a company that is making the world better. So it's not just us, you and me and others, maybe kind of mid-career or average, average Joes, but leaders of the top organizations of the world are embracing this, and they're setting a great example to follow. All of us can do this, and it's more what's going to help you succeed now than what's going to hold you back.
Yeah, it's great, and the more examples like that we can have, I think the better. That's what I keep thinking about is this public vulnerability to be able
Yes.
to first just share and be open about what you're feeling, what you're thinking. That's great. And then when you've got people that are willing to match that with action at that level, like Cisco, those stakes are high.
Yeah.
Right? Like they have stakeholders, and they probably think about stakeholders in very, very deep and wonderful way. But like if he can do it, we can all do it at our
Exactly.
and not to say that we're at varying levels or whatever. All of our lives are important, but be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, Chuck can do it. I can do a little bit more of that in my life too.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't mean to say he's better than anybody else. He would be the first to say he's not. Just
Sure.
pointing out that, like, if we look at those traditional paths of authority and prestige, the folks at some of the best company leaders are doing this kind of work, and I see it as an inspiration for the rest of us.
It's the dream thing. One, I love it because he's willing to say like, oh, I had this dream, and talk about it publicly. My wife and I talk about our dreams every single morning, but I got in the habit of doing that at the last place that I worked at is, with my team, is we're just that comfortable. I tell them, oh, I had this dream, and it, kind of inspired me about this thing, or they probably got sick of me talking about my shower thoughts, but that tends to be, my morning ritual is like I wake up, I shower, which means I've got like all these cleansing shower thoughts, and then I go and I journal, and that's where I can kind of like have all this stuff come out. And that is, my journal is my safe space to just put those, what might feel like crazy ideas, but then they keep showing up. It's like, well, I can't ignore this. Like something is telling me that I need to pay attention to this a little bit more.
Yeah, like starting a podcast on men's emotional vulnerability. Like that was probably in there somewhere. Like that is absurd several years ago, and now you're doing it. So hats off for your work.
That was in there, and I'll have a guest on here. I think she's coming on next week, and I've been writing about this. Hadn't talked to her in 6 months, and I talked to like, hey, let's catch up, and we're talking, and I'm telling her kind of about what I'm up to. Hadn't mentioned men's stuff at all, and she's like, I've got an idea for you. I think that you should get into this like men's mental health space. And I was like, what? You've got to be kidding me. And so of course I tell her all my ideas and she's like, yeah, well, that sounds about right. It was just crazy to hear somebody that was in my life that I was connected with that had, is going to deliver this message to me from somewhere else too.
That's another way that connection piece works, I think, Adam. Like you're saying, like sometimes the people around us see our strengths or our inclinations in ways we can't, or we shut ourselves off from doing. Even when I left Great Place to Work, for example, there was a really beautiful ceremony kind of sending me away, a surprise going away party, you might say. And like 15 people gave these testimonials of ways I'd touched them or the organization over the past 7 years. And it just filled my sails and made me realize ways I can do things in ways I didn't realize and I want to keep doing, so I'm making a positive impact on others. I mean, they could have probably talked a lot about the problems, how I was a pain in the butt, and they withheld that, but just knowing the positive stuff, I saw new things. So I love hearing your story about your friends saying you should do this stuff, and it was already kind of bubbling up in you.
Yeah, and I think that it's also obviously it's easier. I think when people are sharing positive things with you, but you also remained open to what they were saying, and you actually heard it, which goes back to earlier when you were talking about listening and how important that is. Because it could
Mm-hmm.
have been too easy to just be like, "Yes, I am awesome. Thank you for letting me know." Once again, or the other end of that spectrum, which is like, "Oh no, like you're just too humble," right? Which means you're not willing to hear it because you're overconfident or you're
Yeah.
underconfident what's going on. It's finding that right balance to be able to hear the goodness in there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and one thing in particular that I've taken away from these, recent feedback points is being energetic. In a way, it's the cool guy is the right guy in the past, right? The guy that was a little standoffish. You're kind of aloof. You're distant, and you're that self-made man at island. And when I realized, I know I want to be, my exuberance is a positive thing. It's not that traditional masculinity, but it's like people say, I always appreciated you being energetic and elevating the fun, and that is something I want to take forward now that I heard to your point, and it does require being open and being willing to break out of some of those old masculine rules.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. What do you mind sharing? What are some of the other things that you heard from people that you started to appreciate in yourself more?
Another thing that I'm really proud of that and I was a little bit conscious of, but maybe not as much as I realized, it wasn't as aware of as I heard in these conversations, was elevating other people around me. Especially in some way, it was really meaningful to hear it from some women of color, that they really appreciated I'd been like this advocate for them. And I want to keep doing that. I'm more aware of it now than ever in the wake of the Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movement. But I've always had that kind of like, you can do this too. You know what? Get your best stuff out there. As a writer, say I often I co-authored a bunch of stuff with some of these other folks, and they really appreciated that I looked out for them as having a byline in Fortune magazine, say, or in a blog. Or help them give a speech at our conference.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's something real special about being able to elevate the people up around you that always feels so good. Well, we are coming up on the hour today, so I always love to end these mandates with some final words of wisdom. So for our listeners out there who might be watching this later on, I mean, even today, if you're watching this, it is Friday. You got to go back to work. What are some words of wisdom you can leave them with about masculinity at the workplace?
There's a better way. There's a better way than the one most of us grew up with. That says we're supposed to be limited in what we can do in life and how we can relate to others. And a phrase that we came up with in the book that I think rings true to me is that if you're going to show up in those older ways, we risk showing up as rigid, cold, and isolated in a world that's now calling for flexibility, warmth, and connection. So move in this direction of liberating masculinity. You won't regret it.
I love that. Well, Ed, thank you so much for being here today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation as usual. You've been a fantastic guest. I'm so very grateful for you.
Thanks so much, Adam. I had a great experience as well.
All right, we'll talk again soon. All right, everybody, that wraps up today's edition of The Mandate. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you were here live, if you're watching this later, I hope you enjoyed it. For sure, if you're on YouTube, leave us a comment down below. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you find out when we go live with more of these. Hopefully in the future, you'll know that you can always ask questions in the chat. I'll get those to our guests every single week when we have time for them, to drive more engagement and make sure that you get out of this as much as you possibly can. So thanks to everybody who tuned in today. Special thanks to our guest, Ed, for joining us as well. I've got his LinkedIn down there. If you have questions for Ed, want to connect, send him a message, tell him you saw him on The Mandate and want to learn more. And then, of course, got all sorts of goodies over at mandateshow.com for you. We'll put this recording up, the podcast episode, and some more links to stuff that Ed is working on for you to check out. And then we are on Instagram and Twitter. If you want to hang out with us, we are getting that going as well. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. Always a pleasure. Have a good one, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Mandate with your host, Adam Hoffman. It's time to do your part in raising awareness of men's mental health, shifting the stigma, and having a positive impact on someone's life. Share this episode with a friend who could use some support and post it on your social channels. Have questions or thoughts? Text Adam at 512-980-3935. Find more episodes, upcoming live shows, and life-changing resources at mandateshow.com. Your mandate is to take your mental health seriously. Be courageous, stay vulnerable, live authentically. Until next time, y'all.